Welcome back to this conversation about men and mental health, looking at mental health, men's mental health in society, but with quite a particular specific focus on the workplace. And welcome again to Toni White, who's joining us to have this conversation. Hi Toni, how are you doing?
Good. Looking forward to talking about my favourite subject.
Good. And one thing I've picked up from just following you on Twitter and listening to your website is that you make a distinction between mental health and mental illness. What is the distinction, and why do we all need to start thinking about that distinction?
I think it's very, very different for lots of reasons, but society at the moment isn't saying this is mental health and this is mental illness. So what we're having is a lot of diluted conversation in the middle where people are suffering from mental illness, but they tell themselves, oh, it's just mental health, I need to get over it. And likewise, a lot of people will have mental health issues, but they'll actually be mentally ill. So what we have is campaigns that say, you know, we need to eat better, drink less, move more. And I don't agree with the one size fits all approach anyway. But the problem that we have with that is that, you know, exercise, running 5 kilometers might work for someone who is, you know, stressed out at work, which is a natural response to perhaps what they're going through at the workplace, or those who maybe have mild anxiety or mild depression. But running 5 kilometers 4 times a week probably isn't going to help someone that's schizophrenic or bipolar, or someone who has major depression and is going through a really bad episode. So as much as the campaigns are great, what they always say is that the hashtags and discussions are nearly always about mental health and not mental illness. And the problem that you have is twofold with that, because society, when you've got this person here who's struggling, and society says you need to drink less alcohol, exercise more, and eat better. And then that basically blames that person for struggling. And if they're not getting any better, it says, well, you're not trying hard enough. You're clearly not fighting your mind enough. It's just mind over matter. And so what that does to that person who is struggling, and it could be that the fact that they have mental health problems because of workplace, you know, it's quite natural that you're going to feel extremely depressed if you're going through a divorce, for example. But then it allows that person to feel like a failure because they can't get over their mental health. You know, they're doing all the right things. And I do them, you know, I run several times a week. I eat a balanced diet. I socialize. I do all the things that the posters tell me to. And I can still feel suicidal because that's mental illness. And I can still feel really depressed and really anxious because that's mental illness. And so I think a lot of the time now we flip the other way, and any negative emotion now is seen as mental health, or you've got mental health problems. And I always talk about mental health in terms of grief. So if someone you love dies, then in the preceding weeks, you might not go to work. You might have really poor personal hygiene. You might push people away. You might drink. You might have a lot of these coping mechanisms that are considered negative, but you would say that how that person reacts is proportionate to what they're going through. And we would tell them not to ignore how they're feeling. We would say, it's grief, you need to process it, because we recognize that how they feel is a direct consequence of what they've gone through. So, you know, it's the same if you've lost your job, or if you're facing losing your job, and if your marriage is broken down and your kids are about to move house, you know, leave the family home. It's natural to feel like shit. You're supposed to feel like shit. And so I feel, unfortunately, that actually now we kind of, the Happy Clappy Club have come along and said, you know, you just need yoga and kale smoothies. And actually, do you know what? Sometimes, as much as I don't promote drinking, sometimes you do need a bottle of vodka, you know, and then after that you're fine, and, you know, you've dealt with it, you've processed it in your way. So I always say that it's not our coping mechanisms that are negative, it's our relationship to them. Because there's nothing wrong with having a drink or a few drinks on a Friday night. You know, if your girlfriend's just broken up with you after 5 years, you're going to be angry and you're going to be upset. And if you need a night out with your mates on a session, then that's what you need to do. But unfortunately, we've come into that demonize drinking, demonize junk food or whatever it may be. And it's just a case of moderation, and differentiating between the two.
I think you make a point, there, this distinction, between mental health and mental illness. When I retired from police service, I've spoken before about this, that, in 2 or 3 months before retiring from the police service, I got really anxious about what was coming. For 30 years, I'd been looked after, paid salaries every month. I could take a year off sick if I wanted, if I was injured or ill. Everything was looked after. And now I was coming into this phase as a young man. I was 49 when I retired. Am I going to do this? Am I going to be good at what I do? And I started to get really, really anxious about things. I find myself, I keep fit, I go running, but for about 8 weeks, it took me effort to get out of my bed every morning.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's courage, to get up from that place of feeling like crap to actually getting dressed. That takes guts to do that, and that's what you're sort of alluding to there. And when it was my wife that spotted some red flags in me at the time, and started to direct me against relationships, building relationships, someone reaching out and making that contact, and just helping you to start to stabilize the ground again. That's what I found. By someone reaching out to me, they helped to stabilize that ground so I could then make better decisions. And when I started to really speak to my GP about what was going on, it was just a catalogue of things that had been brewing for the last 4 or 5 years. Losing my dad was the big thing, bottling all that emotion up, and how that just something happened, something in me just triggered me, made me feel really unsteady in my feet. And thankfully, I retired, and I'm enjoying life. Like you, I have a passion, you have a passion, and that's got me through that phase. But yeah, it was really quite scary.
Yeah,
I think people don't really realise that. And someone said to me, "I'll go for a run." No chance. Even walking the dog was a massive chore back then. But anyway, we're here, and that showed me that things can change really quickly. And maybe that's what we're going to start to look at, is what we need to be looking out for, and what we can all be doing to provide somebody with that alternative. Because I think that's what's important. If I'm thinking about doing something to myself, and what's the alternative? And we know that can be the distraction to take a person away to get the support they need. Question, let's get back to the workplace. Why should employers pay attention to these issues? What's in it for them?
It's everything's in it for them. Unfortunately, so many companies and organizations, from private to public sector, are all about the short-term gains, and all they want to talk about is return on investment. They want to say, right, we've brought someone in for X amount of money, and for that we've saved 2.3 sick days per 50. That they want the numbers. But actually, if you then flip it around and culturally you start looking for value in investment, you will get that back tenfold, because we all know the adage of look after your people, and your people look after your business, and that's not rocket science. I always say that the only rocket science in the world is rocket science, and I think what a lot of companies and organizations are doing are making mental health and mental illness far more complicated than it needs to be. And actually, it's just about humanity. So I always talk about, when I present, that it's humanity over pathology, that you don't need to have a mental illness to just be nice. It takes more effort to be an arsehole than it does to be good to each other. And so actually, what you do, if you create those cultures that allow people to openly talk about their mental health and mental illness, when they come in and say, I'm having a really bad day, and you say, yeah, okay, what do you need? They will work harder because they're more thankful. You're grateful when people give you kindness in whatever form that may be, and that could be something really small to them, but could be huge to you in that day. If somebody just says, yeah, do you know what, I can see you struggling, just go for a 20-minute walk around the block and see how you feel when you come back. Now, you could argue you've lost 20 minutes of productivity, but that 20 minutes could result in that person, not particularly for men, because men, we allow you to be angry, so I always say that if the world allowed women to be angry and men to be sad, we'd solve a lot of our mental health issues. And so for men, it's acceptable to kind of go into a room and smash it up, and if you just say, I can see you're angry, go and take time out, just go for a walk, come back in 20, 30 minutes. And that could just mean the difference of them calming down, of getting space away from the stressor, and then really being able to bring themselves back from that really, really angry or stressed out place. And we know that mental health has a huge impact on the economy. So some scary figures for you. So they say that every person's suicide will cost the economy 1.67 million. And that every person who dies by suicide affects 167 people. We have 300,000 people leave their jobs every year through mental health. And we've got reports saying that estimates that mental ill health costs the economy about £94 billion a year in the UK. You know, so these are really, really scary numbers, and they're astronomical numbers, and they're only going to keep going up as our awareness goes up. And certainly now with pandemic and with riots going on across the world, we're just going to see that increase. And so it really does pay. But unfortunately, as I said, many companies and organisations look for short-term quick wins, and you're not going to get that. And you're not going to get that with men. Men in particular require extreme amounts of trust, or as we would say, psychological safety, and that takes weeks and months to build up, and it's often a thankless task, but it does work. You know, I get some of the most hardened men in military and police talking to me, you know, men that you would never think would talk about their mental health, and they've got self-esteem issues, but that takes weeks of saying, how are you? This is my vulnerability, for them to start sharing a little bit of it. So it's a long road, but it's not financial investment that you need, it's time.
Yeah, I asked that question, you know, why should businesses pay attention? You know, my answer is often, why wouldn't they?
Yeah.
You know, this is impacting on productivity, on well-being, on relationships within the organization itself. And, you know, I think Deloitte did a study last year which looked at the impact, and it's this massive monetary cost on business by not taking mental health seriously. You know, I remember reading about the boss of Lloyd's of London, Antonio Rosario. He was top person. Was not sleeping, not working, not exercising, not eating well. Started to really feel something's happening. He got permission to, I think, from the board to take some time off. He took a few months off, but when he came back, his lens completely changed, because he had an experience of poor mental health and the impact that was having on his ability to function. And by taking some time off, by being supported by the board, meant he came back a lot better. But he thought, this isn't just about me. This is, if I'm going through this, who else is going through this? And I think we'll in the next section, we'll start to talk about this notion of psychological safety. We'll start to look at how do businesses respond? How do employers respond? How do friends respond to issues? How can we all be in this together, where we start to look out for each other, where we start to build these relationships? Because for me, that the answer to I've heard in the years gone by, the answer to any issue you're having is, what are you doing about relationships?
Yeah.
That's what we'll come on to in the next section.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you mentioned roles, actually, because a lot of the time when I talk about lived experience leadership, and I see it in police often, you know, when I attend events, and they'll have somebody that's high rank, such as, you know, deputy or assistant chief constable, and they'll talk about their anxiety, or, you know, their experience of mental ill health. And so often what you'll find is that the lived experience leadership will come from someone in a position of career safety. So would you know, that ACC or that DEP, would they have talked openly about their anxiety when they were a sergeant? Probably not. Would they have said it when they were inspector? Doubtful. When they went for promotion for superintendent? Not really. So actually, it's really, really great that they're speaking up, and I will always advocate that. But would a teller at Lloyd's who said, I need time off from my mental health, would they have received the same privilege that he did? Probably not. And so then, as you said, a lot of the time leaders, they don't know, either through ignorance, blissful or willful, until mental illness or mental health crisis affects them personally. And then, as you say, they see it through a different lens and they start to understand it more, and they can start seeing it in others. Which is why, as I said, lived experience is important to consult with at every level, because we will see things from a perspective. And if somebody comes in and says, we want this initiative, then we can turn around and say, but as somebody that has gone through it, that isn't going to work because X, Y, Z. And so it's really, really important that we do foster those cultural conversations, and it comes from the top. But unfortunately, when you're at the top, you are quite disengaged from, your frontline customer serving, employees, which makes it very, very difficult to kind of break that barrier between kind of the ivory tower leaders and your frontline, whether you're a cashier or, the head of Lloyds Bank. There's a real disparity between how they're treated. And so again, he's a perfect example of, he had a mental health crisis, he recognized it, he was given, afforded that time off. But if you're a subcontractor and you're a brickie, you're not going to get that. Yeah. So it's, again, this one size fits all approach just won't work, because even in construction, you might have someone, if they're employed by a contractor and they're always employed by that contractor, then they will be an employee, and therefore they will have the same colleagues that they speak to. And so they might be able to feel like they have more of an opportunity to have a conversation. But if you've got that subcontractor that just goes around to different jobs and never really meets the same guys, he's a lone worker. So who will back him? So there's a real, even in that one industry, you've got all these layers, and it's just, the kind of safety is, they just need us to talk. It's reactive, whereas men need you to be proactive. And as we'll come on to say, they need you to build relationships. If you don't have relationship with the men, that you just won't get them to talk.
Yeah, I think, as we finish this section, we've talked about why this is such an important issue for society, but with a focus on organisations and employers. When we come back in the next section, we're going to really first start to think about what can we be doing, how should we be responding. Tony started to look at, this is a long game. This isn't just a short, bring person in, have a chat, move on. This is a long game. And for me, as a person who looks at prevention of abuse and violence in society, that's the challenge I come up against. We're quite good at the short-term stuff, but it's the long-term. And I think it's because that's when you start to really have difficult, uncomfortable conversations when you go into the long term. And sometimes, we need to be having a longer term conversation around these issues. So when we come back, we'll start to look at some ideas and solutions.